My liberated one, there is something I have been watching over you, and I want to describe it carefully so that you understand what has actually been happening in the unseen spaces around your life. Not as a report delivered from a distance, not as a summary handed to you without texture or detail, but as the full account of someone who has been present in every single room you have walked into, every hallway you have passed through, every middle-of-the-night moment when something tried to attach itself to you and follow you home. I have been watching, and what I have seen has not frightened me. It has not shaken my confidence in the path I laid out for your life before your first breath ever touched the air. What has been aimed at you has not landed the way its senders intended. What was spoken against you was never authorized to keep you down. That is the sentence I want to plant at the beginning of everything I am going to tell you today. It is not a comfort offered to soften the edges of reality. It is the actual reality stated plainly. What was spoken against you was never authorized to keep you down. The words meant to define your limits, the patterns meant to repeat in your bloodline, the forces that believed they had already secured your defeat. None of them knew what they were up against when they reached for you. They did not consult me before they launched their efforts, and that was their greatest miscalculation. Let me begin from a soft place, because I want you to receive everything I am saying without your defenses rising before you have heard the full message. I know that at some point in your story, maybe recently, maybe long ago in years that still echo in your body, you were told things. Not all of it came as direct words spoken clearly to your face. Some of it came as patterns. The repeated disappointments that moved through your family line the way a trade is passed down, generation to generation, until everyone inside that line accepts it as simply the way things go for people like them. Some of it came as atmosphere, the kind of heaviness that saturates a household and quietly teaches everyone inside it that joy is always temporary and suffering is the reliable baseline. You breathed it in along with the ordinary air of your childhood. You absorbed it before you ever had the vocabulary to name it or the awareness to question it. That absorption went deep. It reached the parts of you that form expectations without being asked to, the parts that decide in advance what is possible and what is not, the parts that filter incoming experience through a lens ground by years of living inside a particular story about your life and your future. Some of what came against you arrived through the mouths of people who held authority in your early life, people who shaped you imperfectly, sometimes painfully, often without understanding the weight of what they were handing you. They passed on what they themselves had received, the limited self-understanding of parents carrying their own wounds, the careless words of teachers or leaders who spoke from their own unhealed places rather than from any genuine knowledge of who you were meant to become. Words of comparison that left you measuring yourself against something you were never meant to measure yourself against. Words of dismissal that made you carry a quiet question about your own worth for years longer than any person should carry such a question. I know every sentence. I remember the exact moment each one landed. And I want you to know that none of those sentences carried my endorsement. None of them came from my understanding of who you are. They came from limited people operating in limited sight, and they were never the final word about you. Some of what has worked against your life came from sources you could not see. Things in the spiritual atmosphere that gathered around your family line, not because of anything you personally chose, but because of long histories that preceded you by many generations. Agreements made in the past by people whose decisions left residue. Doors opened in bloodlines that carried consequences forward through time, depositing their contents at the threshold of people who never participated in the original choice. You inherited things you did not ask for, the way a person inherits a structural problem in a house they did not build. They did not design the weak foundation. They did not lay the crooked walls, but they are the ones who feel the draft in the winter and watch the ceiling shift when the ground moves. You have been living with the draft and the shifting ceiling. You have adapted to it, the way people adapt to chronic discomfort, not because it is acceptable, but because it has been present long enough to feel normal. And the fact that it has felt normal has never made it right. I know all of this. Every layer of what is pressed against you, the visible and the invisible, the spoken and the unspoken, the inherited and the personally acquired, the damage that came from human sources and the damage that came from spiritual ones. I see the whole picture with a clarity that has never been compromised by distance or by limitation, because nothing about your life has ever been hidden from me. And from that total knowledge, from that complete and perfect sight, I am saying to you with absolute certainty, none of it has the final word, not the patterns, not the words, not the spiritual weight that has been pressing against your bloodline for generations. None of it has jurisdiction over where your life is going when I am the one steering, and what was spoken against you was never authorized to keep you down. I know your name. I want to be very clear about that, because one of the most effective tools that darkness uses is the suggestion that you are anonymous in the universe, that you are one face among an uncountable multitude, and that while the forces working against you have studied you specifically, I hold only general and distant goodwill toward you. That is a lie constructed to make you feel exposed and unprotected. The truth is this: the adversary knows your name because I spoke it first. The darkness knows your address because my light has been burning on it since before you arrived there. Whatever has been targeting you specifically has been targeting something that belongs specifically to me. And I take that personally in the most direct sense of that phrase. Before your features were shaped inside your mother, before any member of your family knew you were coming, before the world had any concept that you would exist, I knew your name. I inscribed it. I set it apart. I attached to it a purpose that nothing in heaven or earth or the spiritual realm has the authority to annul. And everything that has tried to overwrite that inscription with a smaller, darker, more limited story has been operating beyond the bounds of any authority it actually possesses. You are standing in this moment on contested ground, not metaphorically, on the real ground of your actual days, your genuine circumstances, the true weight of the things you are still navigating. And that ground has been contested for a long time. There have been forces that wanted to lay a different foundation under your feet than the one I designed. Forces that worked in the background of your life, often quietly, sometimes through events that felt random, occasionally with a directness that shook you, to build structures underneath your life that would constrain what you could receive, limit where you could go, shrink what you believed was possible for someone with your history and your name. These structures were not built with your consent. Many of them were built before you were old enough to give or withhold consent, in seasons of your life when you did not yet have the discernment or the spiritual authority to refuse what was being deposited around you. Walls were raised around your thinking, thick enough that they began to seem like the edge of the world rather than the edge of a cage. Ceilings were installed over your expectations, low enough that you eventually stopped standing at full height because there was no room. And in your family's longer history, in the generations before you, similar construction was done, layer by layer, building a structure of limitation that was meant to house your entire bloodline in a permanently reduced version of the life I designed. I am tearing it down, not as a future plan, not as a hope I am holding for you. Right now, in this season of your life, with the air you are breathing and the ground under your feet and the days you are currently walking through, I am at active work on the demolition of every wall that was built without my authorization, every ceiling that was installed over your life by forces that had no right to install it, every foundation of limitation that was poured into the ground of your story before you ever had a say. The construction crew that built your captivity did not have a permit from me. They built in violation of what I had already designed and declared for your life. And when the owner of the land shows up and finds unauthorized construction, the unauthorized construction comes down. I am here. I am looking at the structures, and what they built does not impress me. The demolition, from your perspective, will feel like things loosening, like a grip that has been very tight for a very long time beginning, gradually, to release. The thought that always followed success, the one that whispered it, will not last. People like you do not get to keep things like this. Starts to lose the authority it once had in the corridors of your thinking. You begin to notice it as a familiar old voice rather than a reliable narrator. The pull toward the same predictable disappointment, the one that felt like gravity, like the natural arc of things for a person coming from where you come from, begins to feel less like physics and more like a preference that can be refused. The ceiling you always unconsciously deferred to, the one you bumped your head against every time something genuinely good started to grow in your life, develops a crack, then another crack, and eventually, what seemed permanent begins to fall. Not because you manufactured the right combination of effort and positive confession, because I put my hand on the structure from outside and applied the pressure of my authority against it, and what was built by lesser powers cannot stand when I press against it. Now let me speak about the words specifically, because in the matter of what has been working against your life, spoken words carry an enormous weight in the spiritual order I operate within. Not every word pronounced over you carried my authorization. Some of what shaped your deepest understanding of yourself came from deeply wounded people, people who had themselves been spoken over by wounded people, who were passing on the vocabulary of their own captivity without realizing that is what they were doing. Some of it came from sources operating in explicit spiritual darkness, words pronounced over your family in rituals and practices I did not sanction, by people moving in realms they did not fully understand, in service of an agenda that was aimed at reducing you and the people who would come after you. Those words were spoken. They were spoken with intent, and the intent behind them was not small. The agenda they served wanted to write a particular ending for your story, a particular ceiling over your ceiling, a particular floor beneath which your potential would never be permitted to fall. But here is the counter-authority I hold over every one of those words, and I want you to understand this with the clarity of someone receiving not just comfort, but actual truth about how things work. I spoke first. Before any voice other than mine opened itself to declare something over your life, I had already spoken the original and authoritative declaration. I spoke it in the moment I formed you, in the silence before the world had any knowledge of you, in the eternal place where every true thing about a person is written before time touches them. The words I spoke about you in that first moment are the only words that carry actual jurisdiction over your destination. Everything else, every curse, every limitation pronounced in darkness, every word of dismissal or diminishment or defeat spoken over your life by human or spiritual sources, arrived after my word was already in place. And nothing that arrives after the original can overwrite it. The original stands. Sorcery has no authority that supersedes mine. Witchcraft is noise in the presence of my silence. Curses pronounced in darkness dissolve at the boundary of the light I have placed around everyone who belongs to me. They arrive at that boundary and they stop. They do not pass, because the sentence that darkness wrote in the margins of your story has no legal standing in any court that matters. I am the judge. I wrote the original law, and what was spoken against you was never authorized to keep you down. I need to go deeper into something here because the fullness of what I am saying requires it. Some of what has been working against your life is not from outside your family line. Some of the most consequential construction was done inside your own history, across generations, in patterns that moved from one generation to the next, the way a wound passes if it is never addressed and never healed. Patterns of broken trust that taught each new generation of your family that the people closest to you are the ones most likely to hurt you. Patterns around financial provision that seem to hit a ceiling repeatedly to bring a family to a certain level of stability and then pull everything back, as though there were a law operating in your bloodline that said this much and no more. Patterns of addiction, of emotional unavailability, of cycles that everyone inside them could identify and lament, but no one seemed to be able to exit, because the force maintaining them was not merely psychological or behavioral, but spiritual in origin, maintained by agreements made long ago that had never been properly canceled. You have seen these patterns. You have navigated around them or been caught inside them, or watched the people you love be shaped by them. And somewhere in your understanding of your own life, you may have come to an uneasy peace with the idea that certain patterns simply run in your family, that this is the shape of things for people with your history. But I want to be direct with you about something. Patterns are not prophecy. A thing that is repeated for many generations is evidence of unaddressed spiritual construction, not evidence of an unalterable destiny. It simply means the work of demolition has not yet been done. And I am doing the work. The walls in your bloodline are coming down. Every agreement made across the generations of your family that opened doors to oppression, to limitation, to cycles of defeat that were designed to outlast any individual member of your family. I am closing those doors, not because you have perfectly understood every spiritual dynamic at work or navigated every principle of faith without error, because I chose you. Before this pattern had the chance to reproduce itself one more time in your generation and in the generation after yours, I stepped into the line of it. I set my hand against the machinery of its repetition. The machinery is now breaking down under the weight of what I am bringing against it. The cycle is not going to complete itself again. The pattern is not going to hand you the same ending it handed the ones before you. Because the one who makes those determinations has made a different determination. Let me tell you what I see when I look at you right now. Not what the pattern would project. Not what history would suggest based on its own incomplete evidence. What I see when the full sight of one who knows everything rests on where you are standing in this moment. I see someone who has survived what was designed to be final. The pressure that came against your life in certain seasons of your past was not casual difficulty. It was calibrated. It was aimed. It was intended to leave you not merely set back, but conclusively broken, not just discouraged for a season, but structurally unable to rise again. The forces that built against you understood what they were targeting. They understood enough about what I placed in you to take it seriously, to invest real effort in burying it, to return again and again to the work of your limitation when lesser efforts failed. And you are still here. That is not a small observation. That is testimony. The fact that you are in this moment, still connected to hope, still open to hearing my voice, still willing to believe that something genuinely better exists on the other side of where you have been, that is evidence of a resilience that came from outside yourself. You did not manufacture the capacity to survive what came against you. I built it into you before you needed it, and it held. You are not a tree without fruit. You are not a flower without fragrance. You are not a river running dry in its own bed. The old structure said you were. The old sentences, the inherited vocabulary of limitation, kept describing you in those terms. Hollow, empty, producing nothing that lasts, carrying promise that never ripens into the real thing. I want to contradict every one of those descriptions with the actual truth about who you are. You were made to be fruitful. You were designed to carry beauty that others can recognize and receive from. The life in you is not a trickle surviving barely in a parched season. It is a river that has been partially dammed. Yes, partially blocked by what was built across its flow. But the source is not dry. The source has never been dry. The source is me. And when I am the source of what is flowing through a life, the question is never whether the supply will run out. The question is only whether the obstructions are being removed. And that is exactly what is happening now. There is something gentle I want you to understand about the way I work in the middle of this demolition. My spirit is not a force that arrives with violence and leaves destruction in its wake. My spirit comes the way a dove settles, quietly, without the fanfare of machinery, without the noise that announces its arrival from miles away. You may have expected liberation to feel louder. You may have imagined that freedom from what has been working against you would come with a dramatic, visible event, something unmistakable, something that required no faith at all, because the evidence would be so overwhelming. And sometimes I do work that way. But often, far more often than people who are waiting for the dramatic event realize, my spirit moves in the soft and easy settling of a dove landing on a shoulder, in a quieting of the interior noise that you notice only after it has already happened, in a thought that lifts the way fog lifts, in a conversation you were not expecting that carried more clarity than 100 hours of desperate prayer felt like it could reach, in a moment so ordinary on the outside that you almost dismiss it, and then later you understand that in that moment something shifted permanently. My spirit has been settling on your life throughout this process, not waiting until the demolition is complete before becoming present. Present now, in the middle of it, guiding your steps through the rubble, keeping your footing sure in the places where the old structure is still falling. This is the confidence I want to build in you as we go forward together, not a confidence in your own strength or understanding, because those are real but limited. The confidence I am building is something deeper than your circumstances can shake, something that does not depend on the visible evidence of the moment to maintain its stability. It is the settled interior knowledge that you are not navigating this alone, that the one beside you as you walk knows the ground better than any structure that was ever built on it. That when the path passes through what used to frighten you, when it leads you back through spaces where you were burned before, when it takes you past the faces of people who contributed to the old construction and expected to see you still bent under it, you will walk through without the old damage reattaching. You will pass through the fire, and your clothing will not carry the smell of smoke. The ground you used to be afraid to cross will become walkable ground. Not because the fire was not real, because the one walking beside you is bigger than any fire. Now there is a shift I want you to feel as you receive these words, a movement from understanding what has been coming down to receiving what is rising in its place. because I have never been only a God who demolishes. Every wall I bring down in order to clear ground for something that could not exist while the old structure was occupying the space. Every ceiling I remove opens the space above it to a height that was never reachable under the old construction. Every foundation of limitation I uproot makes room for something solid and true to be established in its place, something that will not shift when the ground shakes, something that will not crack when pressure comes against it, something that will not be infiltrated by the same forces that built the old structure, because what I build uses materials that darkness has no access to. The new foundation I am laying under your life is identity, not the identity assembled by circumstances from the outside, not the self-understanding patched together from the incomplete perceptions of people who had only partial sight of who you were becoming, not the version of yourself that was squeezed and shaped by years of living under the old ceiling. The identity I am establishing in you is the one I authored before the world had a chance to author its own version. You are known by the one who made you. Your name was spoken by the highest authority in the universe before any other authority had the chance to name you. The darkness can use old names all it wants. The name that fit the wounded version, the name attached to the pattern being demolished, the name that described the person the forces working against you hoped you would permanently remain. But the name I speak is the one with jurisdiction over your actual future. And the name I speak over you is the name of someone who is kept, someone who is protected, someone for whom the demolition and the rebuilding are both fully underway. From that foundation, I am raising walls around your life, not the kind of walls the enemy builds. Those are designed to contain, to keep small, to make the space of your life predictable and manageable. The walls I am building shelter without imprisoning. They hold back what should not reach you without holding in what needs to go out from you. They establish a perimeter around your household, your family, your future, within which the organized forces that have been working against you simply do not have the access they once exploited. I am surrounding you with a protective boundary that belongs to a different order of authority than anything that has ever been aimed at your life. The armies gathered on the outside of this boundary can make all the noise they want. They can shout their threats into the air. They can wave their formations and present their accumulated dark intentions. What they cannot do is get through. Because I have placed between them and you a barrier of my own construction, maintained by my own authority, and my authority is not comparable to theirs. It is not a stronger version of the same category of power. It is a different category entirely. There is anointing oil I want to pour over your life. In the old language of my covenant with my people, oil carried a specific meaning. It was the mark of preparation, the sign that someone was being set apart for something, the substance applied at the moment a person moved from one chapter into the next. The one who received the oil wasn't the same afterward as they were before. The oil didn't just change how they were perceived by others. It changed something structural about the assignment on their life. It marked them. And what was marked was also protected. The oil signified that this person now carried a designation that was visible in the spiritual realm, a designation that announced something about whose they were and where they were going, and who had the authority to interrupt that path. I am pouring oil over your life in this season. Over your head, which is where the thinking has been told its lies, and where the new thinking needs to be established. Over your household, which is the structure I am both protecting and rebuilding. Over the assignments ahead of you, the ones you can see clearly and the ones you cannot yet, over the work that is waiting for hands that have been freed from carrying what they were never supposed to carry, over the purposes that were buried under the old construction and are being uncovered as the walls come down. The anointing is not decorative, it has practical weight in the invisible order, and what is anointed is also marked as mine. I want to address the fear that still speaks inside you, even as you receive what I am saying. The fear that says, yes, but what if the pattern reasserts itself? What if I receive this and feel strong, and then the old pressure returns, and I discover that nothing has actually changed? That fear is not unreasonable given what you have experienced. You have had seasons of apparent breakthrough that did not hold. You have celebrated relief from pressure that returned. You have climbed out of valleys and then found yourself back in them, sometimes in the same one, sometimes in a new one that felt identical, and each return made the previous celebration feel not just naive, but almost cruel in retrospect. I understand why part of you holds that fear, even while another part of you leans toward what I'm saying, and I want to speak to the cautious part directly and honestly. What I am doing in this season is not the same as those previous interruptions in the pattern. Those were moments where the pressure lifted temporarily while the underlying structure remained intact. They were like adjustments made to a building while the foundational problem went unaddressed. The crack in the ceiling gets repainted, and for a while the room looks fine, but the settling continues, and eventually the crack returns wider than it was before. What I am doing now is going to the foundation. The root of the construction is where my attention is directed, not the symptoms visible on the surface of your circumstances, but the structural source from which those symptoms repeatedly arose. I am not repainting the ceiling of your situation. I am replacing the foundation on which the old ceiling sat. And when the foundation is replaced, the structures built on the old foundation do not have ground to stand on. This is what I mean when I say that what was spoken against you was never authorized to keep you down. The authorization it appeared to operate under was never real. It was claimed, not granted. It was asserted, not legitimately held. The forces that worked against your life were operating in territory they did not actually own, on a claim to your future that was never legally theirs to make. They occupied your story the way a trespasser occupies land, with presence and persistence and enough confidence in their own illegitimate authority that no one challenged them. But I am here now, and I hold the actual deed to your life, and what was built by trespassers is coming down, and what was spoken by those who had no right to speak the final word over you is being overridden by the word of the one who does. Let me speak about where you are in the larger arc of your story, because there is something I need to tell you about the timing you are in. There have been years, difficult years, years that took more from you than any season should reasonably take, where you walked through a kind of interior landscape that I can only describe as a long valley. Not a brief valley with an easily visible exit, but the kind that goes on and bends, and just when you thought you were approaching the other side, the path curved and led you deeper in. You experienced losses in those years. Some of them were the loss of people who left, people who betrayed you, people who simply could not continue the journey alongside you, and whose departure left a silence in your life that took a long time to fill with anything other than absence. Some of the loss was more interior, the loss of a version of yourself you had expected to be by now, the loss of a timeline you had constructed in your mind for when certain things were supposed to have arrived, the loss of a certainty about the future that the long valley slowly replaced with something harder to name. But here is what I am telling you about those years. And I am telling you this not to reframe suffering into something palatable, but to give you accurate information about what was actually happening during the time that felt like loss. Those hard years were not wasted. The valley was not a detour from your story. The difficulty was not punishment, and the losses, though real, were not only subtractions. In some of those departures from your life, what left was something that needed to leave in order for what is coming to have room. The people who could not stay for the next chapter were not built for what the next chapter requires. The version of yourself you were grieving was a version constructed inside the old limitation. It was a limited dream fitted to the ceiling of the old structure. What I have planned requires more height than that. And the years in the valley were years of root development. The root system of a tree grows most in seasons of difficulty, not in seasons of comfortable abundance. What is going to stand in the life I am building for you needs deep roots, and the roots you have grown through the hard years are going to hold what the next season brings without being overwhelmed by the weight of it. The harvest season is opening. This is not metaphor. The hard years of sowing in difficulty, of maintaining faith when the evidence was not cooperating with the faith, of choosing to keep going when the easier and more logical choice would have been to stop. Those years produced something. The seeds went into the ground in seasons that did not feel like planting seasons. They went in through tears, through obedience that cost something, through the quiet faithfulness of someone who kept coming back, even when the coming back was hard. And seeds that go into the ground in difficulty come up with the kind of roots that can hold weight. The harvest that is beginning to open in your life is not a small harvest. It is not measured in proportion to how easy the sowing was. It is measured in proportion to how much faith it required. And the faith you have exercised in the long years has produced something whose full measure you have not yet seen. Stand up straight. I say that not as a demand, but as an invitation to align your interior posture with the reality being established around you. You have been bending under the weight of what the old structure placed on your shoulders. You have been walking with the slight, permanent stoop of someone who has been carrying a load for so long that their body has adjusted to the burden, so long that the bent position feels like the natural one, so long that standing fully upright would feel strange and exposed. But the load is being lifted, the structure pressing down is being demolished, and a person who is no longer carrying a structural load on their shoulders should stand at their full height, not as performance, not to project confidence before you feel it, but because alignment matters. The interior posture of someone who is walking in the reality of my protection is not the posture of someone still crouching under what was never authorized to be placed on them. Begin to practice the posture of freedom. Begin to carry yourself like someone whose foundation is being rebuilt by the one who built it right the first time before the trespassers arrived. Pray. This is not a religious obligation I am handing you. This is a structural resource I am pointing you toward, something that actually participates in the demolition and the rebuilding I am describing. When you come to me in prayer, you are not performing an activity that earns favor. You are occupying the connection that was designed for you from the beginning, the direct line between your life and the source of your life, kept clear and open, accessible without condition. When you bring your family to me in prayer, you are not hoping that your words somehow reach an indifferent ear. You are delivering what belongs on my desk directly to my desk because you have full access to the place where decisions about your family's future are made. I have told you that your prayers for the people you love are important and real. and they arrive at a place where they can be acted upon. I mean that. The intercession you carry for your children, for your household, for the people in your circle who are still living under old structures. That intercession has more weight than you understand. You are not ineffective in your prayers. You are not wasting words into silence. You are a carrier of something that changes things when it is brought into my presence, and I receive everything you bring. There are people in your family who need to encounter me in a way that is real rather than theoretical. People who have heard the ideas, who know the general outline of what faith is supposed to be, but who have not yet had the personal and interior experience that makes the ideas become a living reality. I want to reach them. I want to reach every person under your roof, every person connected to you by blood and by love, every person in your circle whose name you carry in your prayers without yet seeing the answer arrive. I am working in ways you cannot see in the lives of people you are praying for. I am preparing encounters, preparing circumstances that will open interior doors that have been closed for years, preparing moments of recognition in which people who thought they had nothing to receive from me will suddenly understand what they have been missing. Do not stop praying for them. Do not let the length of the wait tell you that the wait will be permanent. I know the timing. I know what each person needs and what moment is the right moment for the work in them to break through. Trust me with the people you love. You are not the only one who wants them free. Your identity is being clarified in this season, and I want you to understand what I mean by that. Not the identity that was assembled for you by the history of your family line, not the self-understanding you developed in response to years of living inside the old construction, but the identity that was true before any of that began to press against you. The person you were before the world had the chance to layer its definitions over who you actually are. That original self is not lost. The construction of limitation covered it the way sediment covers something at the bottom of a river. The thing underneath is still there, unchanged, still the thing it has always been, but requiring the clearing of what settled over it before it becomes fully visible again. That is what I am doing. Clearing the sediment, not creating something new from nothing, but restoring what was always true to its visible condition. You are not becoming someone you have never been. You are returning to the person you were made to be, with the added depth of everything you have survived and the added strength of roots grown in difficult ground. Do not be afraid of the clarity that comes with this. Some people, when the sediment clears and they begin to see themselves with less distortion, experience a disorientation rather than a liberation, because the person they see is different from the person they managed inside the old construction. The one emerging is larger. The one emerging has a different relationship to what other people think and say. The one emerging does not carry the same need for approval from sources whose approval was always conditional and whose withholding of it was used to maintain the old structure. That disorientation is temporary. The truer version of you is more stable, not less. The truer version of you has better footing. Let the clarity come. Let it reorient your understanding of what you are capable of, what you deserve to receive, how you should be treated, and what purposes are actually available to you once the false ceiling is gone. Something is about to shift in how you experience provision. The ceiling over what your family has been permitted to receive, the one that broke just as things were building toward real stability, the one that sent you back to the beginning more times than you can easily count, that ceiling is part of the structure being demolished. I am not promising you luxury for the sake of material abundance. I am promising you the removal of the obstruction that kept the genuine provision I designed for your life from reaching you in full. There is a supply with your name on it that has never been dependent on your performance. never been calibrated to your mistakes, never been allocated based on the limitations the old structure imposed on what you were supposed to be able to receive. It was designated for you before the obstruction was built. The obstruction delayed its arrival. The obstruction is coming down, and what has been waiting on the other side of it will begin to come through. Walk in what I have said. Not when everything is resolved, not when the evidence is so clear that faith is no longer needed. Walk now, in the middle of the transition, with the demolition still audibly underway around you and the new structure not yet fully visible. That is the walk I am asking of you, not the walk of someone who has seen everything and understood everything and been given every answer, but the walk of someone who knows me well enough to trust that what I have spoken is what is real, even when the circumstances around them are still catching up to the declaration. I have a record you can consult on this. I have never abandoned anyone who trusted me in the middle of being rebuilt. Not one person who held on while the old structure came down and the new foundation was being laid has ever been left standing in the rubble of what I demolished. The new thing always rises. The promised thing always arrives. The restoration always comes to completion. The pattern of my faithfulness is unblemished, and you are not an exception to it. Let me take you somewhere before we close this conversation. Somewhere I want you to be able to see, because it matters for how you walk forward from here. There is a place in your future, not far away, not impossibly distant, but real and specific, where you will look back at this season from the other side of it. And when you look back from there, the thing that will astonish you most will not be how dramatic the liberation was. It will be how present I was in the process. How much of what felt like just surviving was actually me leading you with more intentionality than you understood in the moment? How many of the things that felt like losses were preparations? How many of the endings that grieved you were actually the removal of what was occupying the space the next chapter needed? You will look back from the other side of this, and your primary emotion will not be relief. Though relief will be there, it will be recognition. The recognition of someone who can finally see the full blueprint and understands for the first time how the apparently disconnected sections of the structure were actually part of a coherent plan all along. From that vantage point, you will be able to see your children or the young people in your life, and you will carry toward them something that you did not have access to when the old structure was still pressing down on you. You will carry the testimony of a life that went through the demolition and came out on the other side of it with something that could not have been built without the difficulty. The authority in your voice when you speak to the people you love about what I am capable of will not be the authority of doctrine or information. It will be the authority of someone who knows from experience, someone who was inside the old construction and watched it come down, someone who stood in the cleared space and received what I built in the room the old structure used to occupy. That testimony is something I need in your family. I need someone who can speak about my faithfulness, not as a nice idea, but as a lived reality. And that someone is you. The hard years were not only for you, they were producing something in you that the people around you are going to need. Your voice has power in this. Not the power to command me, but the power to participate in the work that is already underway. When you speak agreement with what I am saying, when you open your mouth and release the truth about who you are and whose you are and what has been authorized for your life, you are not generating a force from nothing. You are adding your voice to mine, and the combined authority of your agreement with my word creates something that the old structures cannot stand against. What was spoken against you was never authorized to keep you down, and when you begin to speak in agreement with that, rather than in rehearsal of the old vocabulary, You participate in the demolition. Every time you choose the language of what I have said over the language of what darkness said, you are swinging a pick at the old wall. Every time you declare your identity from my word, rather than from the old pattern's description, you are laying another stone in the new foundation. You are not a passive recipient of what I am doing. You are a co-laborer in it. The work is mine to authorize and execute, but your participation matters, and your voice in it has a weight that is greater than you have been living as if it is. Let me speak to the ones who are tired. Because some of you have been carrying this for a very long time, and the weight of carrying it while also maintaining the daily work of your life has produced a specific kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than physical tiredness. It is the weariness of someone who has been holding something heavy in a posture that was never designed to be permanent, who has been saying just a little longer for a period that turned out to be much longer than a little. I see that tiredness in you. Every part of it. The part that shows in your face in the quiet moments when you are not performing strength for anyone. The part that is reflected in the effort it takes to generate hope on the days when hope does not come easily. The part that is started, quietly, in your most honest interior moments, to wonder whether the fighting has been worth it and whether it will ever be over. Bring that tiredness to me, not as a confession of weakness, because it is not weakness. Tiredness after a long battle is not weakness, it is honest, and I receive the honest version of you with everything intact. You do not need to present yourself as more full of faith than you are. You do not need to hold your exhaustion behind you so that only the stronger-looking parts of you are visible to me. I see the full picture. I have always seen the full picture. And the full picture of what you have carried includes the weight of the old construction pressing against you year after year, and the exhaustion of navigating your actual life while that weight was present, and the grief of the things that did not arrive on the timelines you needed them to arrive on. None of that disqualifies you from what I am bringing. In fact, the most honest I can be with you about this is to say that the ones who are most tired are often the ones whose breakthrough arrives with the most capacity to receive it in full, because they have been emptied enough to be filled without holding something else in the way. You are not too tired to receive what I have for you. Exhaustion in my hands is not an obstacle to liberation. It is sometimes the exact condition in which a person is finally willing to let something be carried by someone else, to stop white-knuckling the weight and simply open their hands. And that is all I have ever asked. Not perfect strength, not pristine faith without a single thread of doubt running through it, just the open hand, the willingness to receive what has always been prepared for you. The families who receive this truth will be different families. The households that open their doors to what I am declaring here will find that the old structures do not have the same grip on the shared life inside them. Walls erected between family members by the same forces that built the individual cages will begin to crack. Patterns that repeated themselves from parent to child to grandchild will lose their momentum. The inheritance will change. Not because everyone in your family will suddenly understand everything or make every right decision simultaneously, but because the foundation beneath the shared life of your family is being replaced. And what I lay as a foundation for a household holds differently than what was there before. You are not fighting this battle for yourself alone. The liberation I am bringing to your life is the beginning of something that will move outward to the people connected to you, the way a new foundation affects every room built on top of it. Pray for the ones still inside the old structures. Bring them to me by name. not with the heaviness of someone trying alone to drag something immovable, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows the builder personally, who has seen what he dismantles and what he raises in its place, who understands that the one they are bringing the request to is both willing and capable and already at work. Your intercession is not wishful thinking directed at empty sky. It arrives, and it arrives at the desk of the one with the actual authority to act on it. There is something I want you to activate in the days ahead. Activate your faith as a posture rather than as an emotion. People sometimes wait to act in faith until they feel faith strongly enough that the action seems supported by internal momentum. But faith that waits for the feeling first has it backwards. The posture comes before the feeling catches up with it. You take the step, and the solid ground is found under the foot that moved. You open your mouth with the declaration, and the interior confidence begins to build as the declaration fills the air. You treat the promise as true in your practical life, and your understanding of its truth deepens through the experience of living inside it rather than outside it. This is not a trick. This is the nature of how faith operates in the order I established. Move in the direction of what I have said, and the experience of what I have said becomes more real with every movement. Stand still, waiting to feel it completely before moving, and the feeling is slower to come because it is built in part by the movement. Begin to move. The courage to take the first step is itself a form of faith, and I honor it. The weapons that have been formed against your life will fail. Every single organized effort against your peace, your health, your family, your finances, your sense of direction and purpose, your capacity to hold on to what I have given you, every one of them is formed against something I am actively protecting. And what I protect with the authority of my name and the weight of my commitment to you does not fall to weapons that operate in a lower order of power. No weapon formed against you will ultimately succeed. The assignment against you will exhaust itself against the boundary I have established without ever touching what it was sent for. What was spoken against you was never authorized to keep you down. Every curse formed against your future dissolves at the edge of what I have spoken over it. Every scheme designed to reproduce the old pattern in your life meets the work I am doing in the foundation and cannot complete itself. You have been protected more thoroughly than you have known. And the protection is not receding, it is increasing. What was spoken against you was never authorized to keep you down. Receive that one more time, not as a slogan, not as an encouraging phrase designed to feel good and fade by the end of the day, as a structural reality about the spiritual order governing your life. The speaking was real. The intent behind it was genuine. The forces behind it were not trivial. But authorization was never granted. The one who would need to grant that authorization in order for such a sentence to have final power over your life is me, and I did not grant it. I have not granted it. I will not grant it. The opposite of what darkness spoke over you is what I have spoken, and my word is the only one that holds when held against the full weight of what is real. You are covered, you are protected, you are kept, you are mine. And what is mine does not fall to what was never authorized to claim it. Amen. If this message touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear these words today. Pass it to the family member still living inside old patterns, to the friend fighting a season that has gone on too long. Type Amen in the comments to receive this declaration over your own life and to stand in agreement with what is being established. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next, because what is being built in you one word at a time is worth staying present for. The next word builds on this one.